There was a time when becoming rich didn't require talent or luck. All you had to do was buy another stock. Because according to everyone, your banker, your neighbor, the newspapers, even the guy shining shoes on the corner, America had finally beaten the oldest law in economics, that markets could only go up. Every morning, Wall Street made new millionaires. Every afternoon, ordinary people stopped worrying about money. Why work harder when your investments were making more than your salary? Factories couldn't build products fast enough. Banks couldn't lend money fast enough. Families mortgaged their homes just to buy more shares. College students became investors. Taxi drivers became market experts. Waiters traded stock tips between tables. The entire country was chasing the same dream, and for a while, it actually worked. Then, one Thursday morning, people started selling. Not many, just enough. Enough to make a few investors nervous. Then those investors started selling too. Phones wouldn't stop ringing. Brokers stopped answering. Banks froze. The ticker machines fell behind. Millions of dollars disappeared. Before people even knew what was happening, within days, fortunes vanished. Businesses collapsed. Banks failed. Families lost everything. The richest country on earth was suddenly standing in breadlines. And the American dream, the promise that hard work would always lead to prosperity, began to crumble before the eyes of an entire nation. But here's the real question. Was this simply an accident? Or was the biggest financial disaster in modern history already built into the system, long before anyone rang the opening bell? Because the story you're about to hear isn't really about a stock market crash. It's about how millions of ordinary Americans were convinced to believe in a dream that was never meant to last. People often remember the Great Depression as a story of poverty, breadlines, dust storms, bank failures, empty factories. But that's only the ending. To understand what happened, we first have to understand how America became convinced that prosperity had become permanent. Because in the late 1920s, the United States wasn't afraid. It wasn't struggling. It wasn't preparing for disaster. It believed it had entered a brand new era. An era where technology would solve every problem, where businesses would grow forever, where wealth would never stop expanding. It was the decade of automobiles, of radios, of skyscrapers, of electricity reaching millions of homes, of jazz clubs packed until sunrise, of consumer credit, making luxuries feel affordable. America wasn't just growing, it was reinventing itself. For the first time in history, ordinary families could buy products that had once belonged only to the wealthy. Refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, telephones, cars. Everything seemed possible, and every new invention reinforced one powerful idea. Tomorrow will always be better than today. Wall Street noticed, banks noticed, investment firms noticed. And before long, they discovered something extraordinary. People didn't just want to earn money anymore. They wanted money to earn money for them. That simple shift changed everything. Because once enough people believe, prices can only rise. Logic quietly leaves the room. Greed takes its place. And greed is one of the few forces powerful enough to convince millions of people that risk has somehow disappeared. That belief would become the fuel for one of the greatest speculative bubbles the world had ever seen. But here's what's fascinating. Many of the warning signs were already there. Some economists raised concerns. A handful of experienced investors quietly began selling. Even a few government officials feared that the market had become dangerously overheated. Yet almost nobody wanted to listen. Why? Because during a boom, the person warning about danger always sounds like the fool. Until suddenly, everyone else becomes one. And that's where our story truly begins. Because before America lost everything, it first had to believe. It had become unstoppable. The streets were alive, money was flowing, fortunes were being made faster than anyone thought possible. America wasn't just celebrating prosperity anymore, it was addicted to it, and hidden beneath all that optimism, a financial time bomb was already ticking. If you had walked through New York in the summer of 1928, you probably wouldn't have recognized fear. Not on Wall Street, not on Fifth Avenue, not even in the neighborhoods where ordinary workers lived. Fear had become something from the past. Confidence was everywhere. Construction cranes stretched across the skyline. New skyscrapers seemed to rise almost overnight. Factories ran at full capacity. Store windows overflowed with products most families couldn't have imagined owning just a decade earlier. Automobiles, electric refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, radios. America wasn't just producing more, it was consuming more. For millions of people, the future had finally arrived. And it wasn't just technology changing the country, it was a new way of thinking. For generations, wealth had been built slowly. You worked, you saved, you invested carefully, you waited. But the 1920s introduced a seductive new idea. Why wait? When fortunes could be made today. For the first time, getting rich no longer seemed reserved for industrial giants or railroad tycoons. Wall Street had become something else. It had become the nation's greatest casino, except almost nobody believed it was gambling. They believed it was investing, and those two words would soon become dangerously interchangeable. Every success story inspired another. A neighbor doubled his savings. A cousin paid off his mortgage. Someone at the office made enough to buy a brand new car. The newspapers celebrated them. Magazines called it a new economic age. Radio hosts praised America's unstoppable prosperity. The message was everywhere. If you're not investing, you're being left behind. It wasn't greed, at least not at first. It was fear, the fear of missing out. Long before anyone called it FOMO, America was already living it. Then came the banks, because optimism alone doesn't create a bubble. Credit does. Imagine walking into a bank with only a fraction of the money needed to buy a stock. Instead of turning you away, the banker smiles. He says, "You don't need all the money. Just put down 10%. We'll lend you the rest." Today, we call it leverage. Back then, it was called buying on margin, and it changed everything. With just $1,000, an investor could control $10,000 worth of stock. If prices went up, profits multiplied. It felt like magic, until prices stopped going up. Nobody wanted to think about that part, because every week the market climbed higher. Every month, new records were broken. Every year, more Americans joined the frenzy. Teachers, dentists, lawyers, secretaries, factory workers, even people who had never owned a single share were suddenly discussing stock tips over dinner. Wall Street was no longer a place, it had become an obsession. One famous story perfectly captured the mood of the time. Joseph Kennedy, the father of future President John F. Kennedy, once claimed that the moment he knew it was time to leave the market was when a shoeshine boy started giving him stock tips. Whether every detail of that story is true or not almost doesn't matter, because the story survived for nearly a century for one simple reason. It perfectly captured the madness of the era. When everyone believes they're an expert, nobody is asking the right questions anymore. Behind the celebrations, something else was happening. Quietly, almost invisibly. Stock prices were rising much faster than the companies themselves. Corporate profits were growing, but not enough to justify the prices investors were paying. The gap widened, month after month. Few noticed, even fewer cared, because on paper, everyone was getting richer. One almost nobody could see. The system had become addicted to confidence, not money, confidence. As long as people believed tomorrow's prices would be higher, everything worked. Banks kept lending, Investors kept buying. Companies kept expanding. New fortunes appeared every day. But confidence is unlike steel, or gold, or factories. It has no weight, no foundation, and once it begins to crack, it can collapse faster than anything built from stone. Still, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Some economists questioned whether stock prices had become detached from reality. A handful of experienced investors quietly reduced their positions. Even inside government, concerns began to grow. But their voices were drowned out by something much louder: success. Because nothing silences doubt, quite like easy money. By the beginning of 1929, America had convinced itself that prosperity wasn't simply continuing. It had become permanent. History no longer seemed relevant. Old financial panics belonged to another century. This time was different, or so everyone believed, and that belief would become the most expensive mistake a nation had ever made. No bubble lasts forever. Eventually, someone asks a question nobody wants to hear. What if these prices aren't real? At first, almost nobody listened. Then one of the most respected men in America stood before a room full of investors and said something that should have stopped the madness before it was too late. It didn't. And that single warning would become one of history's most haunting "I told you so." September 5th, 1929, just outside Boston. A room full of businessmen, bankers, and investors had gathered for the National Business Conference. America's economy looked unstoppable. The stock market was near record highs. New fortunes were being made every week. Most people in that room expected another speech about prosperity, another celebration of the boom. Instead, they heard something very different. A man named Roger Babson stood up and delivered a warning, not a cautious concern, not a minor correction. A warning. He said, "Sooner or later, a crash is coming, and it may be terrific." The room fell silent, because in September of 1929, those words sounded almost ridiculous. A crash? After years of prosperity? After the greatest bull market in American history? To many investors, Babson sounded like a man trapped in the past, someone who simply didn't understand that America had changed, that this time was different. And yet, Babson wasn't guessing. He had spent years studying business cycles. He believed that every boom carried within it the seeds of its own destruction, that periods of excessive optimism eventually create their own collapse. And when he looked at Wall Street, he saw danger everywhere. Too much speculation, too much debt, too much confidence, the ingredients of a disaster. The market reacted immediately. Within hours of Babson's speech, stocks began to fall. Panic spread across the trading floor. Billions of dollars disappeared. Investors who had never seen a major downturn suddenly wondered if the impossible was happening. Newspapers quickly gave the event a name: the Babson Break. For a brief moment, it looked as though the party might be over, but it wasn't. Not yet, because something remarkable happened. The market recovered. Investors returned. The newspapers reassured everyone. Bankers declared that the fundamentals of the economy remained strong. The message was simple. Roger Babson had been wrong. The bull market was alive and well, and millions of Americans believed them. In fact, the recovery made investors even more confident, because now they had proof. The market had survived a scare. It had passed the test. Any doubts that remained began to disappear. If the market could withstand a warning like that, what could possibly stop it? That question would prove fatal. But Babson wasn't the only man sounding the alarm. Months earlier, one of America's most respected bankers had issued his own warning. Paul Warburg, a man so influential that he had helped shape the Federal Reserve itself, he warned of what he called a wild orgy of speculation. He feared that stock prices had become detached from economic reality. He feared that easy money and reckless borrowing were creating a bubble. He feared that when confidence finally broke, the consequences could be catastrophic. Almost nobody listened, because by 1929, optimism had become stronger than evidence. Even inside government, officials were growing uneasy. The Federal Reserve had already begun raising interest rates, quietly trying to cool speculation. But it was too late. The machine had become too large. Too many fortunes depended on rising prices. Too many banks depended on lending. Too many newspapers depended on the optimism of their readers. The entire system had become addicted to the boom. And addictions rarely end gently. There was another problem, one far more dangerous. Almost nobody understood how fragile the market really was. Because underneath all the confidence, beneath the parties, the headlines, the celebrations, stood a mountain of borrowed money, margin debt. Millions of Americans had bought stocks with money they didn't actually possess. As long as prices kept rising, everything worked. But if prices fell, even a little, the entire system could begin to unwind, like a tower built on sand or a line of dominoes, waiting for the first piece to fall. Then came October, and something changed. It was subtle at first, almost impossible to notice. A few investors started selling. Some large institutions quietly reduced their positions. The market became more volatile. Prices began moving more violently than before. The mood on Wall Street shifted, just slightly. The confidence was still there. But now, it was accompanied by something else, uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous, because markets can survive bad news. They can survive recessions. They can even survive fear. But what they cannot survive is the sudden realization that nobody actually knows what anything is worth. The summer of endless optimism was over. The first cracks had appeared. Most people didn't see them. Some saw them and ignored them. A very small number saw them and headed for the exits. They would be remembered as the lucky ones. Everyone else was about to witness one of the most terrifying weeks in financial history. The phones would soon ring without stopping. The ticker machines would fall behind. Men who believed they were millionaires would discover they were bankrupt. And before the month was over, Wall Street itself would begin to panic. October 24th, 1929, Thursday morning, Lower Manhattan. The opening bell rings, and for a few minutes, everything looks normal. Then the selling begins. A few stocks, then dozens, then hundreds. Within minutes, the trading floor is in chaos. Prices are falling faster than the ticker machines can record them. The machines begin to fall behind. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then nearly an hour. Nobody knows the real prices anymore. Brokers are shouting across the floor. Telephones won't stop ringing. Orders are piling up faster than anyone can process them. Outside the New York Stock Exchange, a crowd begins to form. People have no idea what's happening, but they know something is wrong. Very wrong. By late morning, the panic has spread. Investors across the country are calling their brokers. Sell everything. And then comes the moment everyone fears. There are more sellers than buyers. The market is falling, and nobody wants to catch it. Inside the exchange, the atmosphere becomes almost surreal. Fortunes that took decades to build are disappearing in hours. Men who arrived that morning as millionaires are watching their wealth evaporate before their eyes. And then, the most powerful bankers in America decide to intervene. At the offices of J.P. Morgan and Company, a group of Wall Street's financial leaders gather behind closed doors. They know that if panic continues unchecked, the consequences could spread far beyond the stock market. So they act. Richard Whitney, vice president of the New York Stock Exchange, walks onto the trading floor. He approaches the post for U.S. Steel, and in front of everyone, he places a massive buy order, then another, and another. The message is clear. Someone still believes in the market. For a moment, it works. The selling slows. Prices recover. The panic begins to fade. By the end of the day, Wall Street breathes again. The newspapers celebrate. The crisis appears to be over, but beneath the surface, something has changed. The market has lost its innocence, and everyone knows it. For the next few days, investors watch nervously. Every rise feels temporary. Every decline feels dangerous. Then comes Monday, October 28th. This time, there is no rescue. Selling explodes. The Dow plunges. Billions of dollars vanish. The optimism of the Roaring Twenties is replaced by fear, but even then, few people understand what is coming, because the worst day hasn't arrived yet. October 29th, Black Tuesday. Before the opening bell, thousands of sell orders are already waiting. Then the market opens, and Wall Street breaks. Millions of shares flood the market. The ticker machines fall hours behind. The numbers being printed no longer reflect reality. Brokers shout, telephones ring, men stare at the screens, watching fortunes disappear in real time. More than 16 million shares change hands that day, a record that would stand for decades. By the time the closing bell rings, the greatest financial boom in American history is over, and for the first time the country begins to understand the truth. The party wasn't simply over. The entire room had changed. The wealth was disappearing. The confidence was gone. And the American dream had just suffered its first major wound. But the stock market crash was only the beginning, because the real disaster wasn't going to happen on Wall Street. It was going to happen in homes, in factories, in banks, and on the streets of America. The crash had destroyed wealth. What came next would destroy lives. For the people watching from outside Wall Street, the crash didn't look like the end of the world. Not yet. The factories were still standing. The banks were still open. People still went to work. Children still went to school. America hadn't collapsed. But beneath the surface, something had changed. The confidence that had held the entire economy together was beginning to disappear. And when confidence disappears, people stop spending. They stop investing. They stop hiring. They start saving whatever they have left, and that creates a problem, because when millions of people make the same decision at the same time, the entire economy begins to slow down. Factories produce less, businesses cut costs, workers lose their jobs, and those workers stop spending. The cycle feeds itself, slowly at first, then faster. But the greatest danger was waiting inside America's banks. For years, banks had been lending money to businesses and to ordinary Americans. Now, as the economy weakened, borrowers began to struggle. Some couldn't repay their loans. Others simply couldn't repay them at all. And when enough borrowers fail, the bank starts to bleed. Then came the withdrawals. People heard rumors that their local bank might be in trouble, so they rushed to get their money out. Hundreds, then thousands. Everyone wanted cash. Everyone wanted to be first. But banks didn't keep every dollar sitting in a vault. They couldn't. They had lent much of that money to someone else. So when too many people demanded their savings at once, the system faced a problem. There simply wasn't enough cash to give everyone their money back. The result was terrifying. Bank runs. One bank failure could create panic. Panic could create another bank failure, and another, and another. The financial crisis was spreading, but this time there was no ticker machine to watch, no Wall Street floor to blame. The crisis was now happening in towns, in cities, in neighborhoods, at the local bank down the street. And suddenly, the crash had a face. Then came the factories. As demand collapsed, companies began cutting production. Some reduced wages, others shortened working hours, and millions were eventually pushed out of work altogether. The numbers rose, and rose, and rose. By 1933, unemployment had reached roughly 25% of the American labor force. 1 in every 4 workers. Think about that. For every 4 people standing beside you at work, 1 might soon be gone. And for those who remained, there was no guarantee they would be next. Across the country, people lined up for jobs that didn't exist. Men carried their belongings from town to town looking for work. Families lost homes. Farmers lost land. And in the cities, bread lines became a symbol of a country that had once believed prosperity was permanent. The same nation that had celebrated millionaires was now struggling to feed ordinary families. The American dream had changed. It was no longer about getting rich. It was about surviving. And yet, the most painful part of the story wasn't the collapse of Wall Street. It was what happened to people's faith in the system itself. For years, Americans had been told that hard work led to prosperity, that banks were safe, that markets rewarded intelligence, that the future would always be better than the past. Now millions were discovering that none of those promises were guaranteed. The crash hadn't just destroyed money, it had destroyed certainty. And then, the crisis crossed another border, because America's economy was deeply connected to the rest of the world. American banks had lent money overseas. European economies were already struggling with enormous debts left over from the First World War. Now, as American credit disappeared, the shock traveled across the Atlantic. Banks failed, trade collapsed, countries raised tariffs. The global economy began to contract. What had started on a trading floor in New York was becoming a worldwide depression. But there was one final question, one that would haunt America for years. Who was responsible? Was it Wall Street, the banks, the Federal Reserve, the government? Or was the crash simply the inevitable result of a system that had become too confident, too leveraged, and too powerful? The answer would become one of the greatest political battles in American history. And while Washington argued over who was to blame, ordinary Americans were still waiting for work, waiting for food, waiting for the banks to reopen, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell them that the nightmare would end. But the nightmare was only beginning, because as millions of Americans lost their jobs and their homes, a new figure was about to step onto the national stage. A man who would promise to rebuild the country, restore confidence, and fundamentally change the relationship between the American people and their government. His name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and his arrival would change America forever. March 4th, 1933, 3.5 years after the crash. A quarter of the country had no work. 9,000 banks had failed. Savings built over a lifetime had simply ceased to exist. And on that morning, a man who could not walk without help stood before the nation and told it the truth. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. 2 days later, Franklin Roosevelt did something no president had ever done. He closed every bank in America, all of them, not for an hour, not for a day. He shut the entire financial system of the United States and locked the doors. The country was told to wait. Then, on the evening of March 12th, Roosevelt sat down beside a microphone. 60 million Americans gathered around their radios, and instead of speaking like a politician, he explained banking to them, slowly, plainly, as if he were talking to one family at a time. He told them what a bank actually does with their money. He told them which banks would reopen and why, and then he asked them to bring their savings back. The next morning, the banks opened, and Americans stood in line to deposit. More money went in that day than came out. He had done something no policy could do. He had rebuilt belief. What followed came faster than anything in American history. Work programs that put millions back on payrolls, dams, roads, schools, electricity reaching farms that had never seen a light bulb, a retirement system for the old, insurance for the unemployed. Within 2 years, the relationship between an American citizen and their government had been rewritten. But Roosevelt understood something else. Rebuilding trust was not enough. Somebody had to explain how this had been allowed to happen. In 1932, a Senate committee had begun asking questions. Its chief counsel was a former New York prosecutor. His name was Ferdinand Pecora. He had no fortune, no banking career, no powerful friends. What he had was subpoena power. And one by one, he brought the most powerful financiers in America into a hearing room in Washington and made them answer under oath. The country listened. They heard how banks had sold their own customers, securities they privately called worthless. They heard about Albert Wiggin, the head of Chase National Bank, who had publicly defended the market while privately betting against his own bank's stock. When it collapsed, he made millions, and under the law as it stood, he owed nothing in tax. They heard Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange, the man remembered as the hero of Black Thursday, defend all of it as normal business. 5 years later, Whitney would be sent to Sing Sing prison for stealing from his own clients. By the time Pecora finished, the myth was gone. The crash had not been an act of God. It had not been bad luck. It had been the predictable result of a system built by men who understood exactly what they were doing. So Congress rebuilt the rules. Commercial banks were forbidden from gambling with deposits. Bank accounts were insured by the federal government, and a new agency was created to police Wall Street, the Securities and Exchange Commission. Its first chairman was Joseph Kennedy. The man who had sold everything just before the crash was now the man guarding the door. Roosevelt was asked why he had chosen him. His answer was said to be 4 words: set a thief to catch a thief. Americans were told the problem had been solved, that what happened in 1929 could never happen again, and for the next 50 years, they were right. Then the 50 years ended, not with a crash, with paperwork. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the rules written after 1929 were quietly taken apart, piece by piece, each change defended with the same argument, that the old protections were outdated, that markets had grown wiser, that it could not happen again. And on November 12, 1999, the wall Roosevelt had built between ordinary banks and Wall Street was removed. 66 years of separation, undone in a single afternoon. 9 years later, in September 2008, it happened again. Not with stocks this time, with houses. Because according to everyone, your banker, your neighbor, the newspapers, America had finally beaten the oldest law in economics, that property prices could only go up. Families borrowed against homes they had not finished paying for. Banks sold debt they knew would never be repaid. And when it collapsed, millions of American families lost their homes. Now watch what happened next. The banks were rescued. $700 billion, public money. The executives kept their bonuses. And in the entire United States, exactly 1 senior banker went to prison. His name was Kareem Sarageldin, a trader at Credit Suisse. Not a chief executive, not a board member, one man. Compare that to 1938. When the president of the New York Stock Exchange was marched into Sing Sing. In 70 years, the crime had not changed, only the consequences had. And here is the part that matters. In 2008, as in 1929, the money did not disappear, it moved. Every home lost to foreclosure became somebody's asset. Every business sold in panic was bought at a discount. Money never vanishes, it changes hands. In 1929, Jesse Livermore made an estimated $100 million betting against the country. Joseph Kennedy sold everything just in time and built a fortune that would carry his family to the White House. In 2008, the names were different. The arithmetic was not. Because a crash is not a failure of the system. For most people, it is a catastrophe. For a few, it is the moment the system pays out. So the question was never whether Americans were fooled. They were told the truth the whole time. Buy, borrow, believe. The question is who wrote those rules, and who was always going to be standing on the other side of the trade. The 1929 crash did not end the American dream. It revealed its terms. That prosperity would be promised to everyone, and guaranteed to no one. And that when it broke, the people who had built it would be the last to be repaid. But the story does not end in a breadline, because the men who watched this system collapse learned something from it, not how to prevent the next crash, how to own the machine that decides who survives it, And 15 years later, while the world was still at war, they would gather in a hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire and quietly redesign the global financial system around a single currency, theirs. The next time someone tells you that a market can only go up, remember, somebody said that in 1929 too. They said it in the newspapers. They said it on the trading floor. They said it to families who mortgaged everything they owned to believe it. A dream sold to everyone, funded by everyone, collected by a few. That is not a failure of the system. That is the system, working exactly as designed. But here's the question. If a handful of men could survive the collapse of the American economy and come out of it richer than before, what would they build once they were given the chance to design the next one? Not for one country, for the entire world. That story isn't waiting for another video. It already happened. 15 years after this crash, in a hotel in the New Hampshire mountains, a handful of men rebuilt the entire system around one currency, theirs. And I already told you that story. You can see it in description. Welcome to Hidden Dominion.